Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I'm your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we have a guest, and we have Elliot here. Elliot is going to be sharing with us how spirituality has played an effect in his recovery and basically why it has helped him get so far as in his sobriety. And that's a big component that oftentimes people do miss. And so he is here to share his experience with that. And then we also have Benjamin B.
What's happening, everyone?
Ben has blessed us with his presence once again. Elliot, first things first, I want you to tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on multiple social media platforms, so you can find me on Facebook at Real Elliot Hughes, and also on Instagram, Real Elliot Hughes. So, Facebook.com/Real Elliot Hughes, that's where you can find me.
And you can also find him at the garage of Chapel Hill Detox.
Yeah, I'm a National Outreach Coordinator at Chapel Hill Medical Detox, and our office is in a garage, so it's a good time. That's where all the magic happens.
It's a cool garage.
It is.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a neat setup right in downtown West Palm Beach, Florida. So anyways, that's where you can find Elliot, so make sure you hit him up for all of your detox needs.
Yeah, I mean, we're one of the best facilities around, and I'm truly proud to be an employee there. I love what I do.
All right, man, so here we go. I want you to just go into some detail into your childhood a little bit to basically qualify yourself, because, a lot of this stuff is definitely relatability in our listeners. I want them to know that they can relate to you and kind of the path that you had went down.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Indiana, and Indiana's typically referred to as a spot in the Bible Belt. And with that came, I was at church every Sunday. I was an athlete growing up. I was a decent student. So nothing out of the norm. I grew up in the suburbs. My parents divorced at around 4th grade, and so that played an impact, I think, but it wasn't something that, at the time, like, I felt like it really affected me. But I was at church every Sunday, and that was something that, it wasn't forced on me. It was just kind of like something that, we just did. And so even with that background of, having a Christian background, I still fell into, the grips of addiction. And so I started drinking and smoking pot at 14, and then that just progressed to, bigger and harder things as time went by, until, ultimately I found, heroin, which, really brought me down to my knees.
So you said that even though you were brought up in a Christian household, you still fell into, or you fell into that trap of addiction. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
So I think sometimes society can view Christians as almost like holier than thou. They hold themselves to a higher standard, which, and then even people within the church think that there's a stigma. There's stigma surrounding addiction in society, but even within the church, it's something that's not talked about. It's taboo, and so, but that happens all the time. And so I was one of these people that was raised as a good kid in a good Christian home, and but addiction doesn't discriminate. And so even though I was raised with that background, that didn't stop me from being subjected to, the disease of addiction, like so many other, everybody from all different walks of life can run into.
Do you think that because you grew up in a Christian household, maybe as you got older, that it was, because I think that when people really get introduced to drug use or to alcohol, to drinking, it's because they generally they want to have fun, they want to have a good time. It starts off more as a social aspect. So how do you think that did you grow up in a household that was maybe so Christian that you were looking for maybe an outlet?
No, not really. I've had that experience of friends and people that I've met in recovery that was their experience, where it was, it was so Christian and so regimented and so religious that they looked to rebel. It was like, I don't want any part of this. For me, it was more so that it was almost like it wasn't forced upon me to have to do this, and my parents weren't, like that devout Christian. So my mom went to church, and like that's where my faith was instilled and that seed was planted. But throughout those years, she was going through her own struggles and her own walk of, wrestling with her faith. And so I think there wasn't necessarily this, I guess I didn't really understood what I believed. I just kind of went. And so that foundation wasn't really there. And so it was more for the social aspect of, I wasn't having fun going to like church group or Sunday school. And so I saw it, I was torn two different ways. I was an athlete, and with that came parties and things like that. And at the same time, I was a Christian kid, and I could have went either direction. I could have went that route, but I chose to go the route of the partying and the drugs and the girls, and that's what I chose.
To tie into what you were saying earlier about it doesn't discriminate, and also what Tom was asking, it's funny because we see people end up on this path from all different types of families. And, one of the things what Tom was asking about, I see very often a pattern of individuals are very sheltered when they're younger. And then all of a sudden, like, they go out to college and there's this whole new world, and they're like, I didn't know any of this stuff was going on, and it's really exciting. And it happens so quickly, being exposed to, at first, having a couple drinks, smoking a little weed, then you find out the stuff doesn't kill you, it actually feels really good, and go down that spiral. And when we have people coming into treatment, very oftentimes, it just happened a couple weeks ago to an extreme measure. We had an individual come in looking for help, and one of the first things the family says to me is, we come from a very Christian home. I want to make sure the reason that we're touring your facility is that there's not people here from the types of families that don't fit that. There's divorce in their family, and they're just not good families. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic. If you're a drug addict, you're a drug addict. And I just think it's funny when families come in and they, we've all ended up in the same place, yet there's this perceived notion that something's different. But really, at the end of the day, if you're all on the Titanic, you're all going down.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, that I feel that the church has neglected or instilled almost, is that they built these four walls, called it a church, and they don't want to let people in. And so, if somebody that comes from a different walk of life or has a rough background or whatever that is, like, the church was never meant to be a building. It's the body of people. It's a community, and loving one another and things like that. And so I think for a long time, even for myself, that how in 12-step fellowships it talks about a power greater than yourself, and it's a spiritual program, not religious. And that was a barrier that I struggled with, was that I believed that what I was taught was the right way and the only way, and I couldn't open my mind to the fact that this program could lead somebody to get sober despite what was instilled in me as a child.
See, I love these discussions and dynamics because Tom's also a Christian. I consider myself of the agnostic temperament. I'm basically still seeking proof of a higher power, I guess. I do believe in God. I'll throw that out there without a doubt. Just I sit kind of in the camp of I'll never comprehend the power of God, and I'm kind of the point where, not necessarily that I'm not trying to figure it out, but I'm seeking. I'm still seeking proof. I'm still looking for evidence. I know that there's absolutely something greater than me, and for my sobriety, I believe that a higher power, the spirit of the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, has given me this gift and put me on this path. and for me, God has been the solution, but in a simpler, less complicated way, for myself, and really, I believe in individualizing it, and I don't push my beliefs on, say, sponsees, for instance. I was taught in the very beginning, talk alcoholic to an alcoholic, don't talk God to an alcoholic, because a guy like me, I saw the word God in 12-step rooms, and I was like, peace out, I don't want anything to do with that. But I've also grown into the fact that I just had a misunderstanding is what was going on, and I like how you touch on the four walls of the church. Like for me, I found church in my heart, and I could grasp onto the idea that God spoke to me through other people, and people are God's messenger basically. So people were being placed in my life, and I was hearing messages from them, and for whatever reason, put on the path, and those people were put in my life, and things started to happen when I started to pay attention and became open-minded,
So for those of you listening, this particular episode obviously is very spiritually heavy based, and it is something that is very important, at least with the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis in 12-step programs, not even just 12-step programs. I mean, spirituality it's part of being human, I guess, so don't be discouraged that, there's two people that are devout Christians and then an agnostic. I mean, we can all come together and kind of, talk about these things and really come to an understanding as to what can work for each individual person. I mean, people sometimes look at the word God and use that as a group of drunks or good orderly direction. For myself and Elliot, we're Christians, and we do believe in Jesus Christ, and we believe that is the way that, that works best for us, and we're saved by grace and all of that stuff, but maybe that's not your path, and that's something that's hard for you to believe in this very moment, and that's totally okay. That doesn't mean that you can't get sober. You absolutely can get sober. And I can't stand it when there's people out there that are preaching AA, but they say that really Jesus is the only way to get sober. I mean, I've ran into some people that have done that, and I just don't think that that's a good message to send.
Yeah, so that's something I struggled with for a long time was that, being that I believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one comes to the Father except through the Son. I believe that in my heart, and I still do to this day, but that's in a different conversation. When it comes to what I had to realize was that when I'm meeting one-on-one, and Ben said it earlier, talk alcoholic to alcoholic, not God to an alcoholic. Because when I'm meeting one-on-one with a sponsee, or I'm sharing in a meeting, if I come out and I drop, it's a joke I kind of have, drop a J-bomb and say Jesus in a meeting, immediately a lot of the people in the room may stop listening. And that's because of past negative experiences that they've had with religious leaders, or how they were taught, or a Christian did this or that to them. And so I don't want to dilute the message of potentially being able to reach somebody and help somebody get sober just by a past resentment that they have. And so it's something that I've had to work through with myself of saying, this is my belief, and I believe it to my core, but in this moment, is me preaching my belief to this person more important than helping them maybe get sober just for today? And so meeting them right where they're at, because when I was out there getting high, I didn't want to have a conversation about God. I just wanted another day sober. I just didn't want to use anymore.
I think it's important too for newcomers as well, and this is part of my story. For me, being open-minded, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about be quick to see where religious people are right. So I believe in looking at the principles as well. For instance, I reiterate, I'm not a guy that goes to church, but if you look at Jesus, here's a guy who got nailed to a cross and then turned around and said, I forgive you. You know, if I take that and I look at that, I'm like, man, I hope I can be half the man Jesus was. It's a good example to follow. And, you know, I kind of joke about it sometimes, but like asking, what would Jesus do? Well, Jesus sounded like a pretty good dude, so he'd probably make some good decisions and treat people with love, respect, and do some service work, you know? And I believe in taking that aspect and looking at what's truly important, you know, about my character. I've got a good friend who told me in real early recovery, he said, Ben, take care of your character and God will take care of your reputation. In other words, you do the right things. And for me, you know, my sponsor, I touch on this a lot. You know, he told me, he's like, Ben, dude, you don't have a heroin problem. You got a personality problem. And as I started to improve my personality through treating others better, you know, I started to receive back. And I very often share, I was a really late bloomer on the whole higher power thing. I didn't find God in my heart until I sat down with the sponsee and like actually had something to offer somebody else. And I could feel that power, which I call God, like when two men are connected, sharing an experience of, you know, their past and their addiction and the bad things that happened. And it's a guy that you hardly even know. I could sit there with a dude that I met an hour ago who shot heroin for 10 years, just like I did. And within 15, 20 minutes, you feel absolutely connected. By the end of that hour, you're like, dude, we're the same person. It's a really amazing journey, man. You can't tell me that there's not some sort of power involved with that. You know, it's incredible.
So, did you ever just try the church route when getting sober? Like prior to AA or even finding AA or NA or whatever A? Did you ever just try and rely on strictly church?
Yeah, I tried it for years. So I would, because like I had said earlier, the whole power greater than yourself or higher power and not putting a name on it, on what that is, that turned me off because of what was ingrained. And I just couldn't open my mind to the fact that people come from different walks of life and have different beliefs. And I struggled with that. And so I tried a 12-step route, but didn't put the work in, and that didn't work. And then I got to this point where I ended up at a long-term faith-based program, and they didn't teach the 12 steps. It was all biblical-based teachings and how that applies to recovery. And so I held on to that for a long time. And at the end of the day, like, there were things that just going to church couldn't teach me because it wasn't really learning, it was action. And so there was this mess inside of me, because you had said earlier that you found God within, and I do believe he lives inside of us and in our hearts. But my heart was so hard with resentments and, you know, guilt and shame and all these things that I had done in the past, and I couldn't truly experience Christ's love or God's love until I cleaned that mess out. And that's what the 12 steps gave me, was being able to couple those together, because there was a house cleaning that I needed to take part in, and I didn't, know how to do that by just sitting in church and listening to a sermon.
I think, and we see that a lot, that people say, well, I'm just going to go to church. And it's, especially here at the center, when I've seen people not do the work while in treatment, and then they're under this kind of illusion that they're going to just go back home and they're going to get involved in the local church and everything's going to be hunky-dory from that, from then on. And it's just not the case. And I think one of the biggest pieces that, and you kind of touched on it, but just to add to it, the difference between some sort of program, whether it be Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, whatever it may be that you choose, that's what we choose, in church, is a few things, and I'd like to touch on a couple of them. Is one, the sense of community. I mean, you can get a sense of community within church. I'm not saying that you can't, but it's hard to get a sense of community within the church, that with people that have the same let me put it this way. People that claim that they're going to get sober through the church have addiction problems. So unless they're planning on going to that church and literally wearing a shirt on them that says, "Hey, I'm a drug addict, can you give me some community?" Now you have to rely on yourself to reach out to enough people and to find those people that have those same problems that you do. And most people aren't willing to do that, especially Christians. Like, they want to wear this mask, and within the Christian community, it's very hard for somebody to admit that they have addiction problems. So that's one uphill battle. And the other thing is that within programs, there's more to it than just sitting and learning in the 12 steps. Like, that's a huge component of it, don't get me wrong, but there's the sense of community with like-minded people that all have the same end goals. You know, they want to be clean, they want to be sober. There's the service work aspect of it, which, you know, you're showing up early for the meeting, you're making coffee, you're tearing down chairs, you know, and then you have the sponsee part of it. You're getting sponsees and you're taking sponsees through the steps and so on and so forth. And people that strictly rely on the church to get sober, I'm not saying that it can't be done. I don't know. I just feel like it is. It's a lot harder to do that way, and ultimately, I think it's a cop-out. It really is. I think people try and use that church. I'm gonna get sober through the church because maybe they're just too scared, or there's a lot of fear with really going through the steps, or just downright utter laziness. I don't know.
Well, I mean, for me, like I see a lot of that, and kind of like, do I believe that somebody can go to church and Christ can relieve them instantly? Yes, I do. Was that my experience? No. And so with that came this thing, because there's a scripture that says, anyone who is in Christ is a new creation. Behold, the old is gone, you're created new. Like, I kind of paraphrase that there. But so I held on to that verse and was like, well, if I'm in Christ, then this shouldn't be a problem anymore. I kind of created this thing in my head that made it to where if I'm a Christian, like, how can I struggle with addiction? And so what I ended up having to figure out was just by going to church, I didn't truly take an internal look at myself. And the 12 steps in a program gave me a practical way to do that. Because if I look at the steps, like, I see, literally my faith outlined in 12 simple steps. And what that was confessing all this stuff, steps 4 and 5, putting it down, looking at the things I've done, steps, looking at my wrongs and asking God to help correct those. And then looking at the amends I have to make, correcting my wrongs. And then with, 10, 11, and 12, I continue to talk to God. And with 12, I'm being a servant, just like Jesus was. He was a servant. And so, but I didn't know how to apply those in my life until I had worked the 12 steps. And so, it's been a process. And I think people think that because in the Christian community, like you had touched on, being a drug addict in church is taboo. I think any sin that somebody has, a lot of times where people say Christians are hypocrites, we are. Because, I don't want to wear my sin. I have all these issues inside of me, and I'll go to church and button up real nice, put on my Sunday best. But at the end of the day, like, how am I really helping people if I can't, like, show you my wrongs and how God helped me walk through those on a day-to-day basis? Like, that's why I don't think we see the transformation that we could see in people, is because people aren't vulnerable and people aren't honest. We're going through these internal struggles, but because I hold myself to this higher standard as a Christian, I can't look broken. But that's the central message, is Jesus surrounded himself with the broken. And so, but a program really helped me learn these principles and put them into action on a day-to-day basis.
Boy, there's so much stuff here. So, for those that know me, I'm a 12-step guy through and through. If you listen to the podcast, I love that stuff. But the fact of the matter is whether it's the Bible, whether it's the big book, whether it's the basic text, knowledge is not the answer. For me, for instance, I can quote a lot of the big book, and I meet guys who can quote a lot of the Bible. But if you don't have a way to apply those principles in there, it doesn't matter. It's like the saying that, what do meeting makers make? Meeting makers make meetings. It's like going to school, getting perfect attendance, but if you don't apply yourself, do the homework, take the exam, you're not going to pass. It's the same idea there. And I want to share part of my experience too with working with sponsees, for instance. While I said earlier that the big book of AA says be quick to realize where religious people are right, there's also a part later in the book that says it's talking about a gentleman who had some really good religious conviction and beliefs, and it said while his religious convictions were very good, they must have not spelt the necessary vital spiritual experience. So, and I like what Elliot was talking about, like he was referencing like a program of action, and that's personally what helped me find God in AA was there's a program of action. And if you look at like other groups, for instance, the Oxford group is a Christian-based. Is it Christian? Is it a certain denomination? I don't know.
Well, it's Christian. It's out of the Book of James, right?
So they also have the Oxford group 6 Tenets, which a lot of the 12-step stuff was based off of, but it's like taking an inventory, confession, which is essentially what a 5th step is as well, making amends, doing service work. It's all the same principles. And, 12 steps was kind of like, for me, like how to find God for dummies, and it gave me like a step-by-step. And, I share a lot about this where some of my biggest challenges with sponsees, when I get a guy with really strong religious conviction, to be honest with you, I've told a couple of my sponsees, I wait till the right time until I built a rapport, but I sit back and I say, your religious conviction's great, but I get this sense that it's actually in a way holding you back from being open-minded, and I have a guy right now that I work with every weekend, taking him through the steps, and he's like, his answer for everything is, Jesus is going to do this for me. But then if you look at the inventory of his week and his daily prayer and what his plans of action are, it's empty. And I'm like, dude, God will move mountains, but you better bring a shovel, is what I was told. And I see that really often, like you were talking about earlier. I believe as well that God will relieve you of your addiction, but you got to be willing to do the work. It's not like I asked for it, so God's going to give it, and again, I don't have a full understanding of the Bible, but my understanding is for those that show up and do the work, and God will put you through the work. What do they say? If you ask God for patience, he's going to give you more difficult situations so you can practice patience, right? Like I hear that stuff all the time, but.
Ben, I like what you said. That everything that you just said there, and I think it really boils down to one simple statement: faith without works is dead. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, Jesus is going to do all this for me. Well, okay, but at some point in time, he can move mountains, but you do need to bring that shovel, and I think that's where a lot of people miss that piece. Elliot, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think that time and time again we see, whether it's people in the Old Testament or whatever, like there's so many instances in the Bible where, God asked of us to do things. And for me, just sitting back, like I can't just sit there and expect, Jesus or God to, can he do it? Could he just, breathe and instantly change my life for the better? Yes, I believe that. But will he? That's not for me to decide. And so by putting one foot in front of the other and taking these steps in faith and saying, like, God, I believe you'll make a way, so I'm going to walk in faith, not knowing what the outcome's going to be and whether it's good or it's going to bad, I know that you're in control. But I have to put one foot in front of the other or bring my shovel per se. And so, that's kind of how I look at it is, Can he do all of these things? Yes. But will he? That's up to him to decide. And so I suit up, I show up, and regardless of the outcome, I'm going to give him glory and say, okay, this was your plan. What's next? And keep it moving, and just keep having faith and keep trusting that, he's got my best interest at heart because he loves me.
See, I have the belief too that, kind of like you're saying, all the trials that I faced in my life, for a really long time, I had the absolute sincere desire to get clean and sober. But how many times did I go back out, when in my heart, I'm no exaggeration, I wanted it more than anything. I was just incapable at the time. Was that God's plan for me? Today I believe so, and looking back, it sucked. But the thing is today I have it, and it's a part of me where in actuality, I use it as a positive. It's ammunition for when I'm meeting with the guy that's struggling with addiction, and I can look at him and say, hey man, I did that too. Oh, you took water out of the toilet to put in your arm? I did that too. You robbed grandma? I did that too. And just all those morals and philosophies that we break, being outside the men that we know we're capable of being, and ladies. But, speaking of taking this stuff and utilizing it for good, I mean, there's so many families, when I'm talking to a mom or a dad on the phone trying to get their son or daughter into detox and get them some help, when it comes up appropriately, and I'm like, hey, I'll tell you this, I know this through experience. I'm over 8 years sober right now, and I did and went through what your daughter's going through, and today here you think I'm some professional dude, like I got my education shooting dope. I went to school later on for addictions,
Right.
But point is, I had to go through this stuff, and it's an icebreaker for people to know that you understand what they're going through, and I believe God intends for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think he can use our struggles for his glory and for his good. There's without a test, there's not a testimony. Without trials, there's not triumph. Like, you could think of any corny kind of line there is, but no matter, if anything negative that in our eyes we may see as negative, but if we look back and say, something bigger than me brought me through that horrible situation, and now I get to use that to help somebody, that's a miracle in itself.
We talk about foxhole prayers all the time. How many times was I sitting in jail and I'm like, oh God, if you just get me out of this one, right? But then, they let me out, and all that goes out the window,
right.
Instantly. So I got a friend that always says you can't cry out to something you don't believe in.
Right.
And I believe the fundamental ideas in every man, woman, and child, whether you recognize it or not. Mm-hmm. There's some sort of belief there. It's just a matter of tapping into it, and in my experience, getting people to recognize it in themselves. I believe it's in everyone.
So, Elliot, tell me how organized religion, how you kind of incorporate that today into your recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, the balance between those is something that I always struggled with. A Christian going into a program that is spiritual, not religious. And so I attached my beliefs, and it was very religious, even though I didn't see it. And by working a program, it kind of broke the chains on that, and allowed me to truly feel God, and then just go with the flow. So, but I still go to church. I still am a part of a young adult Bible study, because I like to have that balance. I think it's important for me, because I need to feed myself spiritually in regards to people so you get a sponsor when you're early in recovery, and this sponsor guides you through the 12 steps because he has experience, or she has experience in that. And so for me, based off my religious beliefs, which plays a huge part in my recovery, and in Jesus, surrounding myself with like-minded, Christians that can help push me and help me grow and help keep me accountable in areas that maybe my sponsor can't, or maybe my sober supports can't. So there's if I need to learn to stop drinking and how to grow along spiritual lines in regards to that, that's where somebody in a 12-step fellowship is going to help me the most. Somebody that's never struggled with drug addiction or alcoholism can't really guide and direct me in that direction because they've never struggled with it. And then in turn, going to church and listening to my pastor on Sunday mornings and going to my young adult Bible study on Mondays helps me dive into the Bible and learn more about my higher power. And that's important. So the more understanding and the better relationship I have with Jesus and with God, that helps me in my recovery. But I couldn't really tap into that until I learned how to stop using drugs and alcohol, because that kept me from God. It drove a wedge in between there. And so learning to mesh those was very important. And it's difficult at first. And it took me a long time to get to that point. But, I'm grateful for where I'm at now. And I've learned that balance between the two and how to incorporate them together.
So I've got a statement and then a question for you. What's interesting, I always throw this out there to people that are, hesitant to look at a higher power, look at God, spirit of the universe, whatever you want to call it. I always throw it out there. When you were doing drugs, weren't you seeking a spiritual experience? I love it when you get like the hippie kids that dropped a lot of acid and mushrooms, and I'm like, bro, what were you looking for? A spiritual experience, right? And that's the irony in the whole thing. Like, I joke about a lot of times with my sponsees, like, I snort a Roxy, dude, and all of a sudden I'm calling grandma and like, hey grandma, how you doing? And grandma's on the other line like, dude, he's so high right now. But the point is that drugs at one point like brought out the best in me and the good intentions. And I always like to point that out. I mean, obviously later on in addiction, everything falls apart and it doesn't do what it used to do. But like essentially, when I speak for myself and I've watched others go through it, I believe we were seeking a spiritual experience through substances, is the irony. I'm told that the opposite of addiction is connection. But my question for you was, through your experience, is there a difference between religion and spirituality?
Yes, and I can't, it's something that it was a shift in my heart. So, for like, I know people are like in times in recovery and have said, religion is for people who don't want to go to hell and spirituality is for the people who have been there. And like, I don't know if I like that because I haven't really felt that ever applied to me. But I do think there's a difference, but I think it comes down to when I was on the religious plane, I was doing these things because I felt I had to. I was taught that I created this idea in my head that to be a good Christian, I had to pray. I had to go to church. I had to read my Bible. That's what I thought. No one ever said you have to do these things, but that's just kind of what was created in my mind. And then I would beat myself up if I missed church, or I would beat myself up if I wasn't reading my Bible, or I was acting like a buffoon, or shooting heroin in my arm, or whatever it was. But then when I shifted into that spiritual plane, what I realized is now it's this loving connection with something bigger than me that lives inside of my heart that I want more of over and over and over again. And so when I'm not praying, or I'm not reading my Bible, or I don't feel spiritually connected, it's not because I feel bad about it, it's because I'm hungry and thirsty for it. And so that's where that shift happened. I think there's a difference, and I think it's something that was taught as, this is what was taught and what I thought. And then when I shifted into that spirituality, it was something that I longed for and I hungered. So that's kind of where that applies for me, I think.
One way that it was, at least for myself, religion is a set of rules. A set of rules and a set of guidelines that you need to adhere to in order to be part of this religion. And fill in the blank, whatever that is. It could be Presbyterian, Baptist, Protestant, Catholic, There's certain things within each religion that they need to do, which builds that specific religion. And for me, spirituality is it's not about that. It's not about the rules or the guidelines or anything like that. It's more about the relationship that I have with my higher power, which is going to build my spirituality. And the way that you puts it perfect, and that's exactly how I feel. It's not so much about, doing Hail Marys and Our Fathers and, wearing your Sunday best and, all those things. Like, it's obviously good. I mean, I'm not going to say that those are bad things at all. But especially for somebody that's just starting with this, it's really tough for people to, drug addicts and alcoholics have a hard time adhering to rules and regulations anyway. So now you want them to do that and have some sort of, relationship with a higher power. You're fighting an extremely uphill battle, but it does evolve over time. And I think that, for us three sitting here, our spirituality has evolved immensely from day one until now. And I think that's a huge message that needs to be put out there, is that your spirituality will evolve and it will grow, but it also can kind of go away if you're not doing maybe those things. Like, for you, Elliot, it is reading your Bible and being connected with a group of guys, in a Bible study. And, Ben, obviously you have your things that you do with Sponsor. He's heavily involved in AA. And I'm over here. I don't really know what I do, but I do some. I'm just joking. I do a little bit of both, and so I think those are definitely some components that we have to be mindful of, because if we don't do those things, then our spirituality tends to go away, and we're not and then what do? We start relying on ourselves again, and then when we're relying on ourselves, ultimately what ends up happening?
Yeah.
I like Elliot's approach a lot. The message that I'm getting from him. Of course, here I go back to referencing Alcoholics Anonymous, like Bill W.'s story. He talks about in his story, when they mentioned God, the door snapped shut. He was done. But a couple paragraphs later, it's talking about how he took what he liked and left what he didn't, and like Tom was saying, it evolves over time. And the thing that I like about what Elliot's saying is, here I am. I'm a guy, over 8 years sober, and in the beginning would have never gone to church. But Elliot makes me feel like I'm missing out on something. He's talking about this young man's Bible study. I'm like, dude, they sound cool, man. I want to go there and see what's going on. It's about inspiration, and he's a good example of that. Where if somebody sits in front of me in particular and says, like you were saying earlier, find Jesus or die, you're gonna shoot heroin again. Yeah. But here I am talking with Elliot, and I'm like, man, maybe I'm missing out on something. Maybe I should go check this out. And for me, I like and appreciate the way he portrays his experience. It's something, for me, because I said in the beginning, I'm still seeking, I'm still investigating. I probably will be for the rest of my life, but I'm like, hey, well, and coming back to what Tom said about evolving, like my higher power the first week I got sober compared to now, two completely different things, but how to put that in words, I'm still not sure. I'm still trying to figure that out, but no, I really appreciate the message and the way you convey it.
Thank you.
It's attraction, not promotion, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well said.
Man, we covered a lot. Elliot, do you have anything that we haven't covered that you feel like you need to say, or do you feel like we covered just about everything?
No, I think we covered a lot, and I really appreciate you guys having me out today. I love the opportunity to just chop it up and talk recovery and spirituality and God, and because that's how I try to live today. I shot a lot of heroin and did a lot of bad things, and I have a relationship now with a loving God. So to anybody out there listening that the God topic is just too heavy, it's grown. And so I always try to remember what it was like when I first started trying to get sober. I just wanted to have one day where I didn't need, drugs and alcohol to feel like I survived. And so, just hold on. is the thing I want people to convey. Is if you're out there struggling or a loved one's struggling, like, just hold on, because we can recover. I mean, we do every single day.
Good stuff, Ben.
I could keep going on this topic for days. I love this stuff because, the evolution of somebody finding a higher power, and for me getting to witness so many people. I can't tell you how many sponsees I've sat down with that are completely lost in the beginning. One thing that I always convey to people is, if you have no idea what's going on with this higher power thing, that's perfect. Like, it's, in my experience, it's almost better. Like, if you're completely lost, I like that. Like, all right, this guy's lost. Perfect. We'll help him find his way. But that, like Elliot was talking about, that pre-education, that preconceived notion of what God is and is supposed to be per people, and I'll throw this one last thing out, for myself. My sponsor asked me at one point, he's like, Ben, what drove you out of the church? Was it God or was it the people? When he explained to me what that meant, I was like, you know what, dude? My God is a loving God. And I can't let the shortcomings of people drive me out. If you look at the Catholic Church and all the rape and stuff that goes on, like, if I shouldn't condemn the whole church because of the actions of human beings. Yeah, that's not God.
Absolutely.
So I'll stop at that.
Absolutely.
All right, if you're out there and you are really struggling with the whole spirituality aspect of this whole recovery thing, it's okay. It's totally normal. There's definitely answers out there, but the bottom line is you have to be vulnerable and you have to be willing to put in the work. The three of us, we haven't gotten to where we are today without putting in the work and without getting uncomfortable and doing things that we necessarily didn't want to do. So the answers are out there, and my biggest thing would be just to reach out, ask for help, surround yourself with people that have gone through this, and they can help you and walk you through this whole process. And you can reach out to any of us. You can reach out to Ben and myself. Our first names, Ben and Tom, at realrecoverytalk.com. Just send us emails there. And then, Elliot, you can say one more time where they can find you.
You can find me at Facebook at Real Elliot Hughes. That's ELLIOTT, 2 T's. It gets misspelled a lot. And on Instagram, also at Real Elliot Hughes.
So just make sure, go there and find him, follow him, whatever you got to do. Send him a message. And then the same with us. You can find Ben and I, like I said, those emails. You can find us on Instagram at Real Recovery Talk. Any social media platforms for the most part. And if you are a loved one out there that is struggling with your son or daughter or spouse and you have no idea what to say or how to have a conversation with them, you can go to realrecoverytalk.com/conversation, and there you can get a PDF file, and it's basically going to break down in simple steps how to have a conversation with your loved one. It's not easy. It's a hard thing to do, but if you go there and you get that file, we will walk you through that whole entire process. And those conversations have been had on us, and we know how they're received. And there's also ways that you can contact us there as well. So, Elliot, again, I really appreciate you coming out. I appreciate your message. I think that, you're doing a great thing, not only within the recovery community, but within helping people rediscover their faith and get reintroduced back into their faith. And again, just can't be more grateful to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. We will see y'all later.